Okay, well today I'm going to show you how to make a 3 wedge toe, and this will be a toe up sock. So obviously after this is finished you will go on to knit the foot, but in this first video we will just cover the toe and the joining of the toe and maybe the first couple of rows after. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, we need some waste yarn. Most of you know by now that I actually don't use a cast on bonnet. I use a shower scrunchie. But it's entirely up to you, obviously, as to what you use. Okay. Okay, when you've got enough waste yarn, I stop at what is the 9 o'clock position, and then we will be using a piece of Ravel cord. This is obviously to separate the main yarn from the waste. So we knit round to the front of the machine, and then you need to raise all the needles facing you to the halfway mark, and then just bring your Ravel cord round. Okay, and now we're ready to start our sock. Okay. Right. Well, the first piece of your main yarn goes between the first two needles raised out of work, and then we knit across to the other side, and then we put the yarn behind the first raised needle, and then we knit back. Okay. As some of you know, I don't actually normally knit with weights, so I shall be using my hand, but you just do it in the way that you find the most comfortable. So we raise the first needle and we knit across, and the first needle on the other side, and then the second, and the second here. Once this needle's raised, you raise all the other needles to your heel mark, and then you knit back. Then you raise the one on the yarn carrier side, and then raise all these to the heel mark and knit across. Then raise that one there and drop 3. Raise 1, drop 3. Raise 1, drop 3, and you carry on doing this till you are back at the halfway mark, and then I'll explain what we do next. So that's those 3 back to the halfway mark. You raise 1, and what you have to bear in mind, that is the first needle of the start of the second wedge. And the same on this side, first needle. So you knit back, and then you raise the second, and as we said before, when you've raised the second, you bring all the others out of work to the heel mark, and then knit across. And the same applies on this side, and then you just raise 1, knit back, and then you raise 1, drop 3, and you repeat the process back to the halfway mark, and that's your second wedge done. To the start, so that one's raised, last 3 down on this side, and that's the second needle of the third wedge. Needles to the heel mark. Raise 1, knit across, raise 1, drop 3, and this is the third and final wedge for the toe. Last 3 to drop, raise 1, and knit back to the centre and stop, because now you have to drop all your needles ready to pick up the stitches. For your toe. Okay. I tend to just pick the loops up and drop the latch and put the latch back down, because then the latch stays open and you're less likely to end up with a drop stitch when you come to knitting the first row round. So it's just something that I do before I pick up the stitches. Okay. Right, as you know from doing hung hems, you do have 1 stitch less than the amount of needles you're going to be picking up on. So on this side, I pick up the first stitch and I put it on the first needle where the halfway mark is, but on this side, sorry if my hands are in the way, I picked the first stitch up, but it goes on the second needle past the halfway mark. That way you don't end up with a gap when you get to the middle, because obviously you don't want a hole. The other nice thing with this 3 wedge toe up is you do have just a little bit more leeway with being able to pick your stitches up. I know from having done classic toes that it's actually as tight as a drum when it comes to picking these stitches up, and sometimes it's quite a stretch. So this is actually quite a nice way to do them. I do apologise if the camera's not quite in the right place and my fingers are in the way, but it was the best I could do at the time. Okay. Also, if you do use the weights, i.e. the traditional weights and buckle, the only thing I can say is that you most probably have to use your heel fork for the first few rows, because you don't have any part hanging down which you would normally attach them to, so it's something worth thinking about. But personally, as I say, I use soft weights for this because it does actually make life easier. This piece of thread obviously is from where we started, and I just wind it in and out of a few stitches just to start off. And then obviously you've got no end to sew in. The other thing I do tend to look at is just here and here. You sometimes get a little hole because of the way that you've knitted the sock. So what I tend to do is I pick up one of the heels of a stitch that's already been knitted and slip it onto the needles. I might sometimes do this over 2 rows. I'll have a look when we go round. So now I'm just going to knit the stitches off. And then when I get to there, I just check, like for example, there's the Ravel cord which has stayed where it was and not knitted, but most of it looks fine. And now all I do is I sit my soft weight in the top like so, check that all the latches are open, and then you do the amount of rows that you need for your foot. So there we are.